a set of slides, okay, as we did before. So just to go back a little bit, okay? So we're starting on our, let's remember, our webinar 2, yeah? And this is all about really 2 main areas: an accelerated walk through certain sections of the pre-scene, and indeed what we call a mini strategic analysis. In other words, a shortened, an abridged strategic analysis. Before I launch into the core content, I want to share a little gift with you. I like to give gifts to students because I like students. So I'm going to share with you a gift, but it's not the sort of gift that you'll be expecting. This gift is another one of my quotes, okay? Now, when I talk about quotes, or I put them on slides on screen in classes in the old days, back in the old days in face-to-face classes or in webinars, some students just go, oh yeah, whatever, okay? That's up to them. That's up to them. But for me, sometimes some elements of these quotes are important for your success. So in other words, you can take what you leave or leave what you see on screen. It's up to you. This is not a regulation. It's not obligatory. But for me, these sorts of things are important. Let's move to the agenda. Very, very quickly, same as last week, 5 key points. Let's introduce what we're covering today and recap on webinar 1. Second area, an annotated pre-scene walkthrough. I've chosen 3 areas of the pre-scene, small areas, and I'm going to take you through an annotated, highlighted PDF. Within that section 2, I'm going to point to areas of the management level syllabus, whether or not that's P2 or F2 or indeed E2. More of that later. The next area for us is the mini strategic analysis. Now note, as I said, this is mini. In the normal course of events, if we had more time, enough time, you know, in a long-winded class, I would be doing a full-on strategic analysis. But for the sake of time, it's mini. I've got 4 main tools and techniques that we're going to apply. Notice I said we are going to apply, us as a group. I need interaction to the Trymar pre-scene. Next one, wrap up an action plan. I'm going to give you a set of 8 points that if you haven't already put into place, you need to. Final area, our Q&A, as we did last week. I haven't got a problem, ladies and gentlemen, of running it over if you don't have, but I guess it's down to Lewis at the end of the day. So that's the plan of attack 1 to 5. Let's launch in to the first main area, which is just a very, very quick recap on what we did last week. Sometimes, and from time to time in classes, students say to me, you do repeat yourself a lot, Paul. Well, I tell you what, there's a good reason for repeating, because I'm trying to drill into you, adjust, perhaps impact, augment your mindset. So yeah, I'm going to dwell on 1 or 2 things. First things first, remember, you're playing a role. Remember, skills. When you write out model solutions on model exam day or mock exam day, remember, you're in an office, yeah? You're in an office and you work for this company. Watch out for knowledge dumps. Big thing centered on skills is professionalism. Prove in the exam, prove in the mock exams, not that you know everything about Trymar, not that you are a bulletproof expert in P2 or in F2, or you don't need to that, but keep at the forefront of your mind, you're a professional person, and I want whatever I write, even if I'm struggling, I'm keeping my professionalism, I'm keeping to time, I'm presenting well, etc., etc., etc. This is a test in part of your professionalism. Remember, it's not a retest of OT, yeah? If I find out, if I hear from Lewis down the line that students at GSA have had their textbooks out on E2 and P2 and then been reading randomly late into the night, I'm going to find out where you live, and I'm going to come around, I'm going to speak to you in person. We need a modicum of knowledge across the 3 syllabuses. We don't need OT level. We need to be able to write about just about anything. And where we're struggling, where we see a task on the day that's on a subject area, think, I don't like this one, then we have to use some waffle. Remember that if you are using let's put a nicer word together, poetic license. If you are using a little bit of, the marker doesn't know what you don't know, only if you let them know. So what I'm saying is, if you practice on occasion when your back is against the wall within a mock exam and you think, I don't know what I'm writing about here. Yeah. The more you're in that position where you have to use politeness, the better you get at that technique. The better you get at randomly making something up. Sometimes we have to. Yeah. We don't know everything about everything. How can we? Yeah. Next key point. Remember, tactics. Whether or not you accept UAP or not, up to you. If you've got other better tactics, great. But make sure you have an approach, not just to your studies in the next 5 or 6 weeks, but also on mock exam day and on the big day. Watch out for the dangers of the pre-scene. Remember, too much or too little. You know, there is no signposts within this pre-scene that say, let's call you John. Hey, John, on your variant in August or in May, on variant number 3, this question is going to come up. Anyone who thinks like that needs to see a psychiatrist. Yeah. If you're reading the pre-scene over and over again saying, that's probably going to come up on the day of my variant. No, it's not. The pre-scene's there for context, as is the industry. A little bit of research on the industry. Okay. 2 or 3 hours, Googling it all night, nightmare scenario. Strategic analysis. Remember how important it is today that we springboard off these 4 tools and techniques. This is all about this area, the role play. The more we understand the company through the strategic analysis, the easier it is for you to write about the company in questions. Last point, no pain, no gain. You know, this webinar, this party, if you will, is for the people who are comfortable with pain. As I mentioned to you last week, ladies and gentlemen, if you know successful people who haven't been through pain, they are lying. They're lying to you. They failed. They've been through loads of pain. And when they got knocked on the ground, they got up, they put their fist in the air, and they kept punching. If you think that you're going to pass this exam by sitting, Googling the hairdressing industry or franchising, or reading aimlessly into the night, your P2 or your F2 text, yeah? Because reading's easy. I love reading because it's nice and passive. What's not easy is writing out questions. What's not easy is going back to the post-exam guides and wrapping a question from last May or last February around this current pre-scene and seeing if you can type it out. That's not easy. That's painful. I'd prefer to avoid that if I can. But will you let me pass if I avoid all this pain? No, I won't. Nor will CIMA. You're not getting the prize, everybody. You're not getting those letters after your name if you're not going to be honest with yourself. I think you know what I mean. Let's move on from there. So our system, we know. And what we're covering today, let's remember, is right in the middle. In other words, this whole area of analyzing the pre-scene and doing a mini strategic analysis is in point 2. We've done the understand bit, I hope. You understand what the exam's about, what a passing script means, etc., etc., etc. What remains after the analysis phase, which should be happening this week, yeah? If someone in this class is not planning a mock exam this weekend, then for me, we're on the back foot. This weekend is mock exam 1. I mean, Lewis may have another plan in terms of the timetable for GSA, so please forgive me if he does. But at the end of the day, mock exam 1 has to happen soon, because this week is all about finishing off our analysis and starting with some pain, okay? So that's what we're on today. Now, outside of that, when we think about the pre-scene document, I'm going to switch with you today. I'm going to switch with you to the actual PDF. And as I've said, 3 main areas. Page 11, if you have the pre-scene to hand, a hard copy, that may help, but not necessarily required. I'll show it to you on screen. The background. Number 2, the business model, page 15. I'm talking about the area that pertains to value, yeah, creation, definition, etc. And then I'm also going to deal with the financials on page 16 and 17. That's the P&L and the balance sheet. Again, remember from the off, I'm going through these areas fairly quickly, okay? That little bit quicker than I would normally do. Okay. So in terms of our next sort of, if you will, sort of screen share, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop this one and I'm going to get my next screen share up for you. Do bear with me 1 second. And I'll just get this for you. Okay. So I am hoping that everybody can see that okay. Would you do me a favor, anyone at all, and just let me know that you can actually see the PDF on screen? I hate talking when people can't actually see what I'm talking about. Yeah? Are we good with that? Anyone struggling to actually see the pre-scene? Let me just check the chat just to make sure, because I'm not on screen. I'm guessing it's okay. Yeah? I'm guessing it's okay. Okay, perfect. Great. Okay, so listen, before I do anything, let me just show you the key. Yeah, and this is very, very simple. We're going to be running through 3 areas. You're going to see highlights in green, highlights in yellow, and red flags. Yeah. For me, I talked last week about priority areas within the pre-scene. If it's in green, for me, you need to walk into, as it were, your mock exams and in the big day with this information memorized. It's key. Yeah, it's core. Don't have to go looking it up. Yellow is secondary. Now, this is an interesting one. I've said red flag. This means a couple of things. The first thing that it means is get into the study club, or in effect, get into your study text. Yeah, that's the first thing. E2, F2, whatever. And or it means a topic that I like the feel of with this particular scene and this particular section. Okay, so there's the key based on what you're going to see in a moment. Okay, so remember, in terms of getting the best out of this particular section and indeed the next section on a strategic analysis, I'm going to fire 1 or 2 questions out. And the more that you get involved, the better it's going to be, not just for you, but indeed for us. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. I'll put this much up. I'm hoping you can see that. Okay, so what have we got this particular sitting for Trymar? What we've got clearly is a company that's involved in hairdressing and indeed hairdressing franchising. Let's note that this company is very, very well established over 50 years ago. Now, the overall background in relation to Magda, for me, isn't that important. Okay, she's no longer with the company. She sold out. I'm not surprised. She must be in her 70s or 80s at least. But what I do take from this first section is 1 or 2 points. In other words, going back to the year dot, the essence of this business was about several things, not least being innovative. In other words, bringing something new, yeah, that this particular market in Dasland hadn't seen. Seems to me she had first mover advantage. Yeah, she brought to the market something that wasn't already there. And interestingly, and her luck was on her side, because this seems to be an economy. Let's consider past points. This seems to be an economy. In other words, a country that was receptive. Why? Well, because it's affluent. Yeah, it's also got a large population. There was a high degree of demand, a high market. They have a number of major cities that she very, very quickly expanded into. You know, it seems to me, a la Porter's Diamond, and remember, when I refer to theory here, just because it's not in the management syllabus, Porter's Diamond is in fact in the E3 syllabus, just because it's not in there is not relevant, yeah? I'll explain Porter's Diamond. What Porter says under the diamond is, for an industry to grow, for it to grow rapidly, for players to appear and survive and succeed, it needs to have what he calls determinants. It seems to me when we look at the first couple of paragraphs here, this was the perfect storm for Magda. She chose the right country. She had the right ideas. You know, these people were willing to spend money on high-end hairdressing and indeed products. And indeed, it was large enough with a large enough demand, you know, a la demand conditions within Porter's Diamond. for companies to succeed, to usurp other countries by being different or offering a unique premium service. So for me, this is the first couple of paragraphs, not overly important, but a couple of things that we do see later on as well. Now, let's note that in 2003, this company basically listed on the stock exchange. Note obviously so far, when we think about areas such as Mendelow's matrix that we'll see in the strategic analysis, certainly regulators are important. But over and above that, when I think about topic areas linked to MCS companies that are listed, I'm always thinking about debt v equity within F2. I'm always thinking about types of issues. And broadly speaking, in my experience of marking mock exams where issues come up, so a share issue, oh, what are the options? Is it a rights issue? Is it a straight issue? How does it work? What's the advantage and disadvantage? I would say 50% of students don't deal with that well. So here's our first red flag. Let's get into F2 and just make sure that we understand the possible issue types, and indeed, we understand the characteristics of debt and the characteristics of equity and the difference. Remember, debt for some people, much more interesting, tax deductible, the tax shield, probably easier to obtain from a bank or perhaps a VC company, and indeed less complicated in terms of regulations. So remember, we don't need to be a wizard in debt and equity. We don't need to understand the calculation of WACC. We just need to know the basics. So there's our first red flag, okay? Outside of that, when we come into this next paragraph here, it seems that a couple of years, note, very, very short time after the listing, a very short time after the listing, they switched their business model. I'm sure you've noticed this already. They shift the focus from own salons, broadly speaking, to franchising. Now, I don't know why, but I would have thought there's a possibility it was some pressure from shareholders. Think about it. As a listed company, you've got institutional shareholders, you've got perhaps corporate companies, corporate listed companies. You've also got Joe Public. So one way or another, there was a reason for them to shift in to franchising. And indeed, you know what? They've shifted really well. When we look at the split now, in other words, the split between owned and indeed franchised, i.e. the two types, Pop and Sheen, we see that the bulk of what they have right now is franchised. And note, that's only 20 years ago or so, okay? And we'll see when we come to the financials, there's some interesting information in the financials about the split of revenues. This is the split of ownership based on these numbers. A quick reference to real life industry, the largest franchisor worldwide, US company called Great Clips, Great Clips, worth 5-10 minutes of your time. Note, they've got 4,400 locations in the north of America. And I did a little bit of research for them on your behalf. What's the key to their success? The key to their success is strong systems for franchisers, also good prices and good customer service. That's how they've grown. They're the biggest by far, not just in the US, in the world, okay? Next paragraph here, red flag on the left-hand side, as you see. This business is not in the main asset heavy, What do I mean by that? In other words, there isn't a massive requirement to own assets in order to be successful, in order to make money. So there's a preference for leasing, indeed, on the behalf of Trymar, but also they push franchisees to lease. We know F2 leases. Now, if you look at F2, IFRS 18 and leases, you'll see that's probably, I don't know, I would say it's probably the shortest chapter on a standard that there is. There's nothing in that chapter. It's Mickey Mouse. You could learn that off, even if you didn't know what a lease was. You could learn IFRS 18 in a few minutes, sorry, 16, in a few minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you'd know the basics. There's two types, finance operating, accounting treating, bang, you're done, okay? Outside of that, on this particular paragraph, key point, and indeed this is relevant for any successful franchise, look at McDonald's as an example, is this whole idea of style guide and indeed the agreements, the contractual arrangement between the franchisor, i.e. Trymar, and the franchisee, i.e. the various sort of 25, 68% on TP and TS. So the arrangements and the requirements are absolutely key. One final point in relation to this opening section, and we leave it there and move on, is that clearly, based on this section, and it's small, I know, and I've done it very, very quickly, there's no argument for me other than the fact that Trymar, under the banner of Porter's Generic Strategies, is a differentiator. Why? Well, across the board, not just in this section, we keep seeing the words premium, unique, quality, yeah, etc., etc., etc. What we're not seeing anything, if we understand Porter's Generic Strategies, what we're not seeing in anywhere really is any reference to cost leadership, yeah, which is broadly a focus on low cost production. Absolutely not, yeah. And we're certainly not seeing a focus necessarily on focus itself or niching. For me, they're available and they have two price points across the whole market in Dasland. So for me, differentiation is key. Now, just a little recap before I move on to the next element of the scene. Remember, there will be words, there will be tools, models that aren't relevant or within the MCS 3 subjects. Does that mean that you can't use them in your mock exam? Not at all. I would be very impressed with a student, for example, if we get the right type of question that mentioned the fact that this company existed really from the off on Magda's say-so on the basis of determinants, of factors, reasons that came together to drive this industry. I would also be very impressed with a student that made the point, if it were relevant in the question, that clearly this company is a differentiator a la Porter's Generic Strategies. Remember that the marker doesn't know what you don't know. And a case study exam has thousands of different correct answers. The more you differentiate yourself from the students sitting around you, so to speak, just a little bit here and there, yeah, the more enamored your marker is going to be to you. Remember, professional people have good tactics, okay? Let's move on to the next section. I hope that made sense. I know I'm going quickly. Bear with me 1 second. Let me get into here, which is the whole area of value, okay? Now, you'll note that this particular diagram, there or thereabouts, is in every single MCS pre-scene. I don't think that the examiner has missed one. I wonder why that is. Well, I'll tell you why. Because this concept of value is important. Going back to the last adjustment to the syllabus, I believe 2015, CIMA brought in this concept. In other words, rather than prior to that date, we had this concept, which we're all familiar with, of profit. So you have a for-profit business like Trymar, they make profit, you know, they pay their tax and they give it all out, let's say, to their shareholders. No. Value's different. It's not sales, it's how people's needs are met. Yeah, there's a myriad of participants or stakeholders in Trymar's ecosystem. Who are they? It's not just shareholders, the government, you know, the local community, the employees, etc., etc., etc. So this concept of value, and the reason that it was brought in, is to make us all understand that value is created in a number of different ways for a number of different people. Okay, now let's deal with this. Now, I have seen several questions over the years since this was introduced back in the day on this area. Okay, so understanding the highlighted points, in other words, memorizing, I think is important. How do they define value? Very simply, yeah, they basically understand that customers in the Daslandian market, whether or not it's for a pop salon or sheen, you know, are interested in a high quality haircut. And they've built their reputation and hinged it on that. They've also thought to themselves, let's not go low end, let's go high end. Let's capture at two different price points, a high one, yeah, and one in the middle, okay? Coupled with that, note the stakeholder management here, yeah? Key point, they network extremely well, yeah? They're very good with the media. They have a strong advertising and marketing budget. They work with players in the fashion and entertainment industries, and indeed, they work with manufacturers of products. So really, their network, or indeed stakeholder management, is absolutely key. I draw your attention to Mendelow's matrix in the strategic analysis, which is coming up, okay? And what I mean by that is we're going to pigeonhole, yeah? In other words, we're going to prioritize all of the relevant stakeholders, okay? So moving from there, that's how they define value. We've got to please all these people. How do they create it? Yeah, well, bottom line is simple: premium prices. That's how they create the value. If you want a haircut in one of our salons, whether it's franchised or other, yeah, here is your price, and it's a premium price. What do you get for that? Several things, namely quality. People keep coming back. They're very, very loyal. Quick shout out to P2 pricing. Now, it's a long shot, but again, it's a common MCS topic. So let's not walk into the exam, so to speak, not understanding the possible approaches to pricing. There's quite a few of them, okay? There's quite a few we know from P2. Outside of that, let's go to the post-exam guides, yeah, and look for one or two questions on pricing and twist those questions around Trymar. Outside of that, you'll see another reference there to differentiation. In terms of delivering value, how do they do it? Well, broadly speaking, two ways: either own salon or a franchise salon. Note that they are nationwide across two key price points. They've got it all covered. They've got it all covered. Also, their locations are absolutely bang on. It's very, very easy when you're going to get your shopping done or when you're at work, because they're, broadly speaking, based in all the popular main cities across the country. You can't miss a Trymar salon. You can't, unless you're blind, okay? So in terms of delivering value, that's how I do it. Quick shout out here. The reason I put this in is not so much anything on this particular page on value, but there is a link in one way, wouldn't you agree, between value and the whole area of narrative reporting and indeed integrated reporting. What I mean by that is that certainly integrated reporting, in essence, in a nutshell, is to some extent about reporting on value in part. It's about reporting on many, many things, but it's certainly relevant to this idea of imparting knowledge about what you're up to, and indeed what you're going to be up to interested stakeholders. Another reference here you'll see to pricing P2. Okay, now let's go up to the area of capturing residual value. Okay, just bear with me 1 second, everyone. I just want to check an IT area of this. Bear with me. Bear with me. You want to make sure that we don't lose. Bear with me 1 second. Hey, sorry about that. Just checking my power. Okay. So just last one here. We've covered the first three. What about this area of capturing residual value? Now, you remember when I started a few moments ago, I talked about profit. So traditional view, let's make profit, let's pay tax, and let's split it with our shareholders. No, no, no. What we're talking about here is the idea that this myriad of different stakeholders who have an interest in this business, that could be the government, it could be the franchisees, it could be the end consumers, it could be the employees. The bottom line is that Trymar is very, very good at creating that value and indeed capturing it and passing it out. Okay, Note from the financials that we'll see in a moment, please do note the percentages that I've calculated for you, not so much in terms of you're going to be asked a direct question on the day of the exam, but we need to come into the exam forewarned with the big numbers, okay? I'll show you what I mean in a moment. So in summary then, on this particular side, we've seen a couple of references to red flags and a couple of references to how the examiner could come at this particular slide. But the bottom line here with value is, do not ignore this page. And please, as mentioned, please go back to the post-exam guides and check for questions. Okay, let's move into a quick run through the financials. Now, when I say a quick run through, this would probably be 2 or 3 times as fast as I would want to do it. But again, we've got a lot to cover today. So you'll know from the financials, I'm sure you've had a look at them, and maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, are there any tricks in there or anything I need to be worried about? Well, let me explain a couple of things. But for me, let me just say that on the face of it, this is a very, very solid set of financials. There's nothing major in these financials that we have to worry about. Does that mean that we should ignore them? No, definitely not. More of that in a moment. Okay, so let me run you down. Let me just clarify a lot of information up here. Let me clarify all the numbers here. Firstly, all I've done here is just a split, a split with the 4 different revenue types, 2024 and indeed 2023. Now, that does tell us something because look, there's basically no change. So there's no shift in revenues year on year. Maybe we would have expected them. Is one more important than another? Is one becoming more important? Not at all. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, what do we see when we look at the top line here in the revenues? We see growth, yeah? These are the sorts of percentage that it was, if I was writing a question or marking a question, and it was in the right area. So let's say, for example, perhaps it was in the area of, I don't know, financial analysis, or, perhaps something broad where it would be easy to fit in a quick stat that said, Trymar have done extremely well over the last few years. This year, revenues in terms of franchise royalties increased by nearly 10%. That's it. I don't want 3 or 4 sentences or a paragraph or 2 on that. I just want to know that the student is bringing something to this party in terms of knowledge of this company. They're an employee after all, okay? Let's also remember that in the area of financial analysis or ratio analysis, there's absolutely no chance of the MCS examiner setting a question on the day that involves you simply regurgitating something that Paulus has provided you with. You're not going to get a question say, please provide an analysis of the financials as shown at the PC. No chance, 0. So does that mean that financial or ratio analysis isn't a good topic? No, because what he tends to do is ask a question that involves a change in the numbers. So put simply, let's say something like, I don't know, impact upon gearing or impact upon the financials broadly of this acquisition. Or perhaps something like, we're considering using 2 suppliers. What would be the impact on our financials given their numbers? And they'll give you extracts from these 2 suppliers. One has a high gross profit, one has low, one has low gearing, one has high gearing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a comparison with you using the information that you've learned about the Trymar financials to answer another question, but it's never going to be rote learned knowledge dump, never. Okay, so top part there, nothing overly interesting apart from the fact this is good news. Outside of that, and when I say GPM and OPM, what I'm meaning there, for example, we see here cost of product sales to franchise. So I'm literally saying the relationship between that and product sales to franchises. So I'm looking at the margins between them. I've said here cost of operating company-owned salons versus company-owned salons revenue. So I call that OPM. So you get the drift of it. Now remember, these are the sorts of little stats here and there, little numbers that I like to see used if we get the chance to, or if we get a direct question, okay? Moving down the page, any other good news? Well, broadly, everything's good news. Operating profit, no massive change year on year. none of the changes year on year for me cause me any interest at all. They're all solid. Yeah. Note also finance costs. Yeah. A drop in that. And you'll see that's reflected within the statement of financial position, because it looks to me highly likely they have paid off some borrowings in the year, which doesn't surprise me, because anyone who's had a close look at the financials and the balance sheet will know that their gearing is fairly high for a non-asset heavy business. So a drop in interest costs would be relevant if you've got less debt, okay? In terms of PBT and indeed net profit margin, again, solid, no issues at all. So on this first page, nothing to report except let's get our tails under one or two of the percentages. Let's learn them off, okay? Next area, again, much of the same really here. DPR, dividend payout ratio. Now, this doesn't surprise me, yeah? What I mean by that is this is the ratio of payouts to shareholders, remember they're listed, in comparison to the profit level. It's pretty high. I've seen higher, I've also seen lower. So it's clear to me there's some pressure from shareholders, institutional, corporate bodies, possibly even the public, year on year, for this company to pay out the profits that they make. Okay, normal stuff. Let's move into the balance sheet very quickly. Here, what we see here is reference to one or two key areas, but not too much. For me, key point here is cash is slightly down, yeah, but not significantly. I'm surprised with the amount of dividend payout that they make. In terms of total assets, not much of a change year on year. Here's the key point. Probably the most interesting thing for me, certainly, is the idea that share capital, share premium static year on year. So no issues in the year, yeah? No issues in the year, but they did pay off some debt. Now, what does this mean? Well, they didn't issue last year, so raising finance would be something that they could certainly consider doing, even if they had issued last year, but it would certainly be open to suggestion. This brings me back to my point about F2, debt and equity. In other words, the pluses and the minuses. Generally with the MCS exam, if you raise this finance as a topic, it's going to be broadly, what are the benefits or the difficulties or the limitations or the risks of using this route rather than this route? Now, note, in terms of limitations, let's note the gearing levels. For me, fairly high for a business of this kind. That would certainly be considered, it's not abnormal, but it's fairly high. But notice it's down because of the payoff of debt. They went from 95 million to 85 in the course of the year. So I put a red flag on here for debt and equity, and on here particularly for gearing. Okay, so moving from there, basically that gives us the end of the pre-scene walkthrough. Now again, I've gone through it fairly quickly. Do revisit the video if you need to do. What I'm going to do is going to switch back now to our slides, if you bear with me one moment, and get you through the strategic analysis. My colleague has been trying to fix my camera, but he's given me a thumbs down on that, I'm afraid. So unfortunately, I can't come on camera today. My apologies for that. Okay, so this is where we were. We were in the mini strategic analysis area. So leaving the pre-scene, talking about the analysis, first and foremost, we touched on this last week. What is it? What is this strategic analysis that Paul is talking about? And indeed, what are the main components? A couple of things. We're talking about research. We're talking about analysis. We want to look at the company internally and indeed look at its environment to become more informed. Purpose. Why are we doing it? Well, we want to assess them. We want to assess their strategies and indeed, most importantly, and indeed on a practical level, if we were doing this in real life, we'd do it so that we could come up with future strategies going forward. What should we do? Well, how can we establish that if we haven't analyzed ourselves and analyzed the external environment? So what are the components? Well, Johnson, Scholes, and Whittington talk about this whole area of ACI. In other words, if you want to come up with some sort of full-on analysis, and indeed, if you want to employ strategy formulation, then make this analysis part of the ACI model. So establish your purpose first, your goals, and your objectives. Analyze yourself internally, That will help you come up with options or choices as referred to here. Once you've come up with 3 or 4 options, choose one and then implement it. Where do you go from there? Well, go back round in a loop. So really this idea of strategic analysis is in this phase of the ACI model, part of the bigger picture of trying to formulate strategies. Outside of that, this mini analysis, what are the elements? 4 main parts. Now, in a full-blown analysis, I'd include 10 parts, but for us, we're limited to time. I'm going quickly. You'll be familiar with, in the main, these models, certainly the SWOT and the thought Menlo. Maybe not these two, because these are within E3, but I'm going to explain them, and I'll give you a few pointers. So what we need to do is we need to apply our knowledge of those tools and techniques to the pre-scene. Now, tutorial note 1 here, this is just for after the webinar. I'll put some information here. I'm not going to deal with them now. This is just some background knowledge, just a definition, copy of the model, but we'll push for time, as I say. This is 3, this is 4 to 5 forces, and 4. Don't worry if you're thinking, I don't know what Ansoff's matrix is. Don't worry about that. I'm going to explain. So these 4 last slides are just for tutorial purposes after the webinars. So let's apply these models to the Trymar pre-scene. And indeed, let's apply them, everybody, together. Yeah, not just me. Okay, so let's go. The SWOT analysis. Yeah, anyone help me with this? What do you think in terms of SWOT? I mean, clearly the SWOT is about strengths and weaknesses, what's good and bad now, yeah, and indeed opportunities and threats, what's good and bad in the future. Any thoughts on a strength? Anyone in the audience? A strength. What's a key strength of Trymar based on your analysis so far of the pre-scene? Anybody? What's their biggest strength? Remember, I'm not doing the exam. You are. You're doing the exam. Help me out. Let me see what we've said. 50 years, yeah. Length of time in operation. Anyone else? Any other takers? What about the financials? Would you say the financials are a strength based on what we've just seen? Yeah, I think so. Good job. Strong financial performance. You know, how might we say that was evidenced by? What evidence is that? Increase in turnover. Remember, 9.9% year on year. Strong margins across the board, operating, et cetera, NPV. Yeah, quite a strong balance sheet. There's no issues. So financials are a strength. Their brand and their reputation, as someone mentioned, you know, it's been 50 years in the making. They're extremely well known. They're one of the big boys. Their business model is a strength. Remember, just after listing, 2 years, they changed it. They've moved to franchising and they've honed that whole area. Their systems, their requirements, you know, we saw within the first section of the pre-seed walkthrough, we saw a requirement for, you know, franchisees to toe the line in terms of style, decoration, infrastructure, etc. So that business model is bulletproof. What about weaknesses? What do we think? Every company must have some weaknesses. For me, gearing is a weakness for them. Yeah. I think maybe, I don't know, there might be a problem if they went for more debt, because that's going to push them over the 100%. The reliance on Trymar sheen seems to me to be a possible weakness, because at the end of the day, very expensive hairdressing experiences, yeah, are very expensive. It's a luxury. What happens if they have an economic issue? What's if there's a recession? The first thing that goes in a recession is luxuries. So they have a fair degree of reliance on punters going and spending a lot of money. Opportunities, clearly expansion, not just nationwide, but also overseas. The acquisition of another player. We saw from the pre-scene, there are a number of available targets for an acquisition here. They've also, it seems, got enough ability to generate money. It seems to me they may well have to borrow or issue shares to be able to afford it, but I don't see that as the end of the world. So that's certainly a possible target going forward. Product development, you know, look at L'Oreal, you know, look at the area, for example, let's say of VR, virtual reality, augmented reality. You know, the areas of tech may well provide them with new opportunities for product development. What about threats? What are the threats to Trymar? Well, takeover is one. They're a listed company. Yeah. They're very well known. They're very profitable. There are other players in this market, either in Dasland or elsewhere. Economic conditions must be a threat. This, in the main, is a luxury experience. Now, I'm not saying in a recession everyone cuts their own hair, but they may be looking to penny pinch. And much of Trymar's profitability and revenue comes from consumers who've got a fair amount of money in their pocket. Outside of that, new entrants and competition. This is a very competitive market, and indeed, other players could enter. Next key point is technology. And I've mentioned this in opportunities, but it could work the other way. In other words, if there is some advance, and there are advances, not least in VR AR, but other areas, if there is a, if they're not on top of it, yeah, they could get usurped in the marketplace. Next area for us is Mendello. Now, this doesn't need too much explaining. It's about prioritization. The first area, remember, Mendello is all about power and interest. In other words, prioritize your stakeholders based on power and interest. First area, low power, low interest. For me, low level staff. Yeah, there will be a range of low level staff employed by Trymar. Broadly speaking, those low level staff, with respect, are after their salary or wage at the end of each week or month. They're not overly interested in the strategic direction of the company. What about keep informed? Note, low power, but high interest. For me, middle management, probably some of the smaller franchisees. You know, they're very interested, but can they do much? Can they impact upon the boardroom? I don't think so. Suppliers in the main, because I think products for use within a given hairdresser are probably available from quite a number of suppliers. Outside of that, next area, keep satisfied. Let's remember that under the keep satisfied banner, high power, low interest. Big mistake that students make here, I think sometimes, is with individuals, not so much the lenders, but government and indeed regulators. They tend to put them in the key player category because they believe they have high power and high interest. No, governments and regulators are only interested in Trymar to the extent that Trymar fall foul of regulation. So when they start not towing the line, then their interest goes up, then they become players. But on the face of it, as long as Trymar are satisfying normal, customary legislation and regulation, these people don't have any interest. So lenders would be the same. Next area, key players. Clearly, the board. Outside of that, it's a listed company. The shareholders are definitely key players. High power, high interest. And indeed, some of the major franchisees. Okay? Next area for us, POTUS 5 forces. Now, this model, yeah, is about competitive attractiveness of a given industry. In other words, if you were in the industry as a player like Trymar, yeah, would you want to stay in it? Is it an attractive industry? Is it profitable to be in there? Or if you were outside it, wanting to go in, should you go in? You should rank the forces across the board based on low, medium, high. Let's run through them quickly. The power of buyers. What do we mean by the power of buyers? What we mean is these buyers are, in effect, Joe Public, like you and me, but also, for me, the franchisees. So what we're saying is, do the buyers from Trymar, do they have the power to impact upon Trymar? For example, in terms of, let's say, the price of the haircut, or maybe the arrangements as regard to franchisees. Now, what increases that? What increases that power? Well, certainly the degree of competition. There's other hairdressing chains in the market. There's other places that you can go to pick up a franchise in this industry. So that increases the power of buyers. What decreases it? Well, as we said earlier on, the brand. This is a great brand. This is one of the top brands in Dasland. Are you going to jump for something? This company's around for a long time, making millions. Yeah, they've got so many different franchisees. This is a great business to be involved in. So what's my take on it? I would say in the middle. I think this is medium force or thereabouts. Okay, that's just my opinion. You may think differently. What about suppliers, and who are the suppliers? Well, I'm talking about suppliers of anything. I'm talking about employees supplying labor. I'm talking about manufacturers, products, dyes, etc., etc. Bottom line is that certainly in terms of something that would increase the power of these suppliers, this is a massive market. As we saw in the early part of the Pleistocene, there's a number of players. You, as a supplier, jump ship, go to someone else. But you know what? As with the above, this is a great company to be involved with. And if you can supply one company, why can't you supply another? This wouldn't be someone I would want to mess with. If I was supplying dyes or anything else, I don't want to jump ship on them. This is a great company. So for me, power of suppliers, low, definitely low. What about new entrants? In other words, new players entering the market, new competition. Well, what increases the threat? Well, capital is, is the capital needed? Is it overly heavy duty? Not really. What about decreasing the threat? Well, the network, as we saw within the value model, the network of good quality arrangements and relationships, social and otherwise, that this businesses have with everybody, not just with competitors, not just with franchisees, but with governments, et cetera, et cetera. So it's difficult to replicate that quickly. For me, it would be anyway. Substitute, this is the easiest one. Substitutes mean, yeah, is there a threat, yeah, or a product or a service that satisfies the same need, but is manufactured or delivered in a different way? For me, there really isn't. There really isn't. The threat of substitute. So is there a substitute for a high quality haircut in Dazzling's capital city? What, do you want to be at home, do it yourself? Notice we're not talking about a competitor product. I'm not talking about going somewhere else down the road to commit. I'm talking about a substitute for a high quality haircut. And unless you're going to cut your own hair, I don't know if there is. Maybe what might increase the threat is a depression. In other words, the economy going bust, people have got no money. Maybe I would cut my own hair, but unlikely. Yeah. In terms of decreasing it, really pressure, peer pressure, the beauty, the fashion industry. People don't want to be cutting their own hair. You know, they may go to a competitor. That's not a substitute. But this product is very difficult to replicate. Okay, outside of that, this last one here, which sort of brings all the forces together, competitive rivalry. Now, this is certainly for me, this is a heavy duty industry with a high degree of rivalry. What increases that rivalry? The growth of the industry. It appears to be growing nicely. Outside of that, what decreases it? Well, there's some people in part that have this particular market sort of sewn up. Trymar is only one of them. So, in terms of the degree of rivalry, it's difficult for independent, smaller players to compete at this level. Very, very difficult. So just in summary, yeah, what do we have? We've got, either M's, mediums, or indeed lows. So bottom line is, when we think about the attractiveness industry, yes, it's attractive if you're in it. It's profitable if you're in it, but it's very, very competitive. It's difficult to survive, and you need to be on your game. Okay. Last area for us is this area of Ansos's matrix. Now, if you're struggling to think, well, I don't understand what Ansos's matrix is, don't worry. We'll do some research. All this is, yeah, and all I need you to remember is the terminology. In other words, Ansos, Igor Ansos from Harvard, is simply saying, if a business like Trymar wants to grow, wants to expand, broadly speaking, it has four main options. It can either, number one, penetrate further into the market penetration. Now, for us at MCS level, all we really need to know is market penetration as an option going forward for Trymar simply means let's do more of what we've already been doing. Let's do more of the same. So what is that? Well, marketing well, advertising well, managing that business model, particularly a la the franchisees, yeah, providing quality to consumers and focusing on being a differentiator. That's what they've been doing. All that market penetration means in terms of existing product, existing market is, let's not do anything different. Let's just keep on growing as we've done, or in an organic way. What about here? Product development. Now here, what we're talking about is a new product in an existing market. We're talking about coming up with a product that's different and offering it to our existing market, existing consumers. A little bit more risky, as you would expect. because no, this new product, whatever it is, VR, AR, a new diode, it's not tested. So let's be careful. What's the next option and increasing in terms of risk? Market development. This is an easy one. And for me, an obvious one for Trymar. This means either expanding nationally, i.e. more cities, more franchise, more salons, or possibly, yeah, internationally. That might be a nice option because it looks to me at a push as is dazzling to some extent, a little bit saturated, but maybe not entirely so. Last one, never really an option. Diversification. We're saying here, rather than hinge or leverage on your existing competencies, i.e., you're great at franchising, you're great at hairdressing. Forget all of that. Let's do something completely different. Let's move into opening cafes right beside our hair. This is high risk. This is new product or service in a completely new market. So this has a lot of X's against it. And invariably at the MCS exam, this will very, very rarely be any option for a business unless it's specifically mentioned by the examiner. Okay. So I'm going to wrap up now in terms of an action plan very quickly and then come to our Q&A. Sorry for keeping you a little bit over time. Okay. What do we need to do going forward? Review both recordings. Attack the pre-scene as you've seen me attack it. I'm looking for hot topics. I'm looking for references, even loose references to the three subjects. Outside of that, put 3 mock exams in your diary today. Yeah, I'm just going to say that again in case you didn't listen, in case you didn't hear me. Schedule the mock exams now with preferably, subject to what Lewis and GSA tell you, one for this weekend. Yeah, I said it. Unless Lewis and GSA tell you otherwise, there is a mock exam this weekend. Now, I know what some of you, maybe all of you will think, but Paul, you see, I'm not ready. That's the point. That's why I'm telling you to do it, because I know you're not ready. And I know that you'll underperform, but you'll learn from the experience. I need the dates and times, the location, the environment, and I need the world and his wife, your boyfriend, your husband, your girlfriend, your mother, the cat, the dog. I need everybody to know those dates because you are not going to be disturbed on those dates. You won't have your phone with you anyway, so they can't contact you. You're doing a 3-hour mock exam, and the first one is this weekend. Trust me on this, everybody. Review post-exams. That should say post-exam guides. So as I touched on within the session, look at the post-exam guides, at least the last couple, because that will cover a year, and that covers a lot of exams. Look for questions that you think might work okay with the Trymar pre-scene. Every industry is different. And then, have a bang at writing out an answer. Not exactly, not over 3 hours, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and then check the model solutions. So look for an ability to wrap an old exam question and a requirement, not a full mock, an old mock around the Trymar pre-scene. Next point, ask questions. I've had 1 or 2 students over the years, not many, that when it comes to results, and they don't get what they want, they'll say something like, do you know what? I did have some issues, or I did have some problems, or I wasn't sure about this, but I didn't want to disturb you. What? Why? The tutors, GSA, they're there to help you. Ask questions now. Don't put yourself in a position, if you get bad news on a results day, you're thinking, do you know what? I wish I'd contacted Lewis, or I wish I'd contacted Paul, or I wish I'd contacted my SCSG, or whoever it is. Ask questions now. This is what we're here for, okay? Check the industry, but be careful. When I say check the industry, I'm talking about from time to time. Have you got 10 minutes spare? Are you on a bus? Are you in a car? Great. Check it out. Look at L'Oreal. Look at the big players. Just read a little bit. Don't be an expert. Just check the industry out. Also, this is key. Be honest with yourself. I can tell you, I was thinking about this morning and how to put this to you. I think the best way for me to put it to you is this. Anytime in my experience, I'm going to be I'm going to be 60 in September this year. If you want to send me a present, I'll give you my address. Please do send me lots of nice presents. But my point is this, not my age or presents. My point is, whenever I've had a disappointment, whenever I've had something that hasn't gone well, whether it's examinations, business, or just generally, more often than not every time, but more often than not, is because I haven't been honest with myself. I haven't said, Paul, you need to do this, this, and this. Yeah. Or Paul, really, should you do that? Or shouldn't you really do it that way? This would be the best. More often than not, being totally honest is going to give you better outcomes. Now, in the context of the MCS exam and Trymar, what I'm thinking of is ask yourself on a daily basis, am I doing enough to get the results that Lewis and that Paul and the GSA want me to get at the beginning of July? Am I doing enough? Did I do enough today? Ask yourself that question. And if the answer is no, then tomorrow, change your ways. Change your ways. Okay. Last point. Again, I touched on this last week. This was from my uncle in Dallas. 100% believe. You know, you can talk yourself into a pass on this exam, yeah, next month, or you can talk yourself out of it. So you can give yourself positive messages, yeah. It doesn't cost anything, and it's not illegal. The last time I looked, it's not illegal to get up in the morning and say, do you know what? I'm passing this exam. Okay, I'm pretty crap on P2. I don't care. I'm passing this exam. You can program yourself to success by trying to give yourself positive messages. Now, just to qualify that, what I'm not saying here is that every day between now and your exam in May or August, you're going to get up every morning and you're going to say, hallelujah, everything is fabulous. I'm not saying you're going to feel great. What I'm saying is when the doubts creep in, when you fail a mock, when you think, I don't know, pick yourself up and keep moving forward. Have belief. Just because it's a little bit up and down from week to week, you have a bad day at work, that's normal. That if it was all fabulous every day, everyone in the world would be CIMA qualified. It's not. Some people can't hack it. You can. Okay. I wish I was on camera. Lewis, I've not stopped talking. I must apologize for keeping you so late, but that's the way it goes.